Jonathan Jack Reed was the kind of man who preferred a quiet life. He wasn't flashy or loud, but he had a presence that commanded respect. A decorated veteran and current commander of an elite unit of U.S. Army Rangers, Jack had spent years serving his country in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. But when he came home to his small Texas town, all he wanted was peace. His suburban house wasn't fancy. It didn't have marble floors or gold-plated fixtures, but it was cozy, warm, and perfect for him and his teenage son, Ethan. The backyard was Jack's favorite spot. It was big enough for barbecues, lawn, games, and even target practice, though only with proper safety measures in place. Jack believed in teaching Ethan responsibility, especially when it came to handling firearms. Firearms weren't just tools to Jack, they were part of his heritage, passed down through generations. They reminded him of his father, his grandfather, and the values they stood for: discipline, respect, and protection. And so, every weekend, Jack would take out one of his shotguns or rifles, clean it meticulously, and show Ethan how to care for them properly. But Jack wasn't reckless. He knew the laws inside and out. Every firearm he owned was registered, legal, and stored securely in a custom-built gun safe tucked away in his garage. The safe was heavy-duty, nearly impossible to break into, and equipped with biometric locks that required Jack's fingerprint to open. He took no chances when it came to keeping his weapons secure, not just because of the law, but because he understood the weight of responsibility that came with owning them. To Jack, guns weren't toys. They were tools meant to protect, not harm. Despite his careful approach, trouble found its way to Jack's doorstep. It started innocently enough, as these things often do. One lazy Sunday afternoon, Jack decided to clean one of his shotguns on the front porch. The weather was perfect, sunny, but not too hot, and he thought it would be nice to get some fresh air while working on his collection. He sat on a wooden chair, placing the disassembled shotgun on a small table beside him. As he worked, he hummed a tune he remembered from his childhood. It was peaceful, almost therapeutic. What Jack didn't realize was that his actions were being watched. Across the street, Mrs. Peterson, a nosy neighbor with binoculars permanently glued to her face, peeked through her curtains. Her eyes widened when she saw the shotgun. "Oh my goodness," she gasped, clutching her chest. She immediately called Gloria Thompson, the president of the Homeowners Association, HOA, to report what she'd seen. Gloria was a force to be reckoned with, or at least she liked to think so. In her late 50s, Gloria fancied herself as the unofficial sheriff of the neighborhood. She wore pencil skirts and blazers like armor, walked with purpose, and spoke with authority. She ran the HOA meetings like a drill sergeant, barking orders and demanding compliance. Under her leadership, the HOA had introduced strict new rules about everything from lawn decorations to noise levels. Recently, she'd added a clause about visible displays of weaponry, though no one really knew what that meant. No one except Gloria, of course. When Mrs. Peterson told Gloria about Jack cleaning his shotgun on the porch, Gloria sprang into action. "This is unacceptable," she declared, pacing back and forth in her living room. "We can't have people parading around with weapons like this is the Wild West. What if children see? What if someone gets hurt?" Her mind raced with worst-case scenarios, each more dramatic than the last. Gloria decided something needed to be done, and fast. But instead of calling the real police, she came up with a plan. She contacted 2 off-duty security guards from a nearby mall, men she vaguely knew from her days managing retail stores. She convinced them to pose as police officers and confront Jack about his supposed illegal arsenal. She promised them it would be quick and easy, assuring them they'd be doing the neighborhood a favor. The guards, eager to make a few extra bucks, agreed without much thought. As Gloria plotted her scheme, Jack remained blissfully unaware. He finished cleaning the shotgun, reassembled it, and locked it safely away in his garage. He went about the rest of his day as usual, helping Ethan with his math homework and grilling burgers for dinner. Life was good, simple, and predictable. Or so he thought. Unbeknownst to Jack, the wheels of chaos were already turning. Gloria's makeshift posse was gearing up for their confrontation, fueled by misplaced confidence and a complete lack of understanding about who they were dealing with. Jack Reed wasn't just any ordinary homeowner. He was a highly trained soldier, a leader of men, and someone who could spot a fake a mile away. But none of that mattered yet. For now, Jack's world still felt calm, untouched by the storm brewing just beyond his fence. And so as the sun set over the quiet suburban neighborhood, Jack settled into his recliner, flipping through channels on the TV. Outside, the streets were silent, save for the occasional chirp of crickets. It was the kind of evening that made you feel grateful for the little things, for family, for safety, for peace. But deep down, somewhere in the shadows, trouble was lurking, waiting to disrupt the tranquility Jack held so dear. The next morning dawned bright and clear, with the kind of Texas sunshine that made everything feel crisp and alive. Jack had just finished brewing a pot of coffee when he heard it, a sharp knock at his front door. He set his mug down on the kitchen counter, curious about who might be visiting so early. When he opened the door, he was greeted by two men standing on his porch. They wore uniforms that looked vaguely official, though something about them seemed off. Their badges gleamed under the sunlight, but the way they shifted uncomfortably told Jack they weren't entirely confident in their roles. "Good morning," one of them said gruffly, trying to sound authoritative. "We're responding to reports of illegal firearm possession. We need to come inside and search your property." Jack blinked, processing their words. His first instinct wasn't anger or fear, it was suspicion. In his years as a soldier, he'd learned to trust his gut, and right now his gut was screaming that something wasn't right. These men didn't carry themselves like real police officers. There was no calm professionalism, no air of authority. Instead, they fidgeted nervously, glancing at each other as if unsure of what to say next. "I'm happy to cooperate," Jack replied evenly, keeping his tone polite but firm. "But before we go any further, I'll need to see proper identification." The two men exchanged uneasy looks. One of them hesitated before pulling out what appeared to be laminated photocopies of badges. Jack resisted the urge to laugh. Even from a distance, he could tell these were fake. The edges were uneven, the text blurry, and the design suspiciously generic. Whoever these guys were, they clearly hadn't put much effort into fooling anyone. Least of all someone like Jack. Instead of calling them out immediately, Jack decided to play along. Years of military training had taught him the value of patience and observation. If he pushed too hard too soon, they might panic or escalate the situation unnecessarily. So, he simply nodded, pretending to study the IDs closely. Then, without missing a beat, he stepped outside and closed the door firmly behind him. "Let's talk out here," he said calmly, crossing his arms over his chest. "You can explain why you're here and we'll take it from there." The men visibly stiffened, clearly thrown off by Jack's composed demeanor. They had probably expected him to either cower in fear or lash out defensively. Neither reaction would have been surprising given their line of work, or lack thereof. But Jack's calmness threw them off balance, making them second-guess their plan. "We received credible information," the taller of the two stammered, clutching his clipboard tightly. "Reports suggest you're harboring an illegal arsenal. This is a serious matter, sir." Jack raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "An illegal arsenal? Interesting choice of words. Tell me, gentlemen, where exactly did this credible information come from?" They exchanged another glance, their confidence wavering further. "That's confidential," the shorter one muttered, avoiding Jack's piercing gaze. Jack leaned back slightly, letting silence stretch between them. He knew how effective silence could be. It forced people to fill the void, often revealing more than they intended. Sure enough, the taller man blurted out, "Look, we're just doing our job. Let us inside and we'll sort this out quickly." At that moment, Jack made a split-second decision. He wouldn't let them into his home, not until he confirmed their legitimacy beyond doubt. Standing tall, he shook his head firmly. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm afraid I can't allow that. My Fourth Amendment rights protect me from unreasonable searches. Unless you have a warrant signed by a judge, we're done here." The men bristled, their frustration bubbling to the surface. "You're making a big mistake," the taller one snapped, jabbing a finger toward Jack. "We'll be back with reinforcements. You won't get away with this." Jack didn't flinch. Instead, he gave them a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Feel free to do whatever you think is necessary, but remember this. Impersonating a police officer is a felony offense, and trust me, I know how to handle felons." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. The two men hesitated for a moment longer before turning on their heels and storming back to their unmarked van. As they drove off, Jack watched them disappear down the street, his mind already racing ahead. Something about this whole encounter felt orchestrated, deliberate. Someone had sent them, and Jack intended to find out who. Once they were gone, Jack wasted no time. He grabbed his phone and dialed the local police department, explaining the situation in detail. He described the men's appearance, their behavior, and the suspicious badges they'd flashed. He also mentioned the surveillance camera mounted above his garage, which captured the entire interaction on video. Within minutes, a patrol car arrived and officers began investigating the incident. As it turned out, the fake cops were indeed imposters, off-duty security guards moonlighting as enforcers for Gloria Thompson, the HOA president. When questioned, later, the men admitted they'd been hired to intimidate Jack into compliance. They claimed they didn't realize their actions were illegal, insisting they were merely following orders. Orders, it seemed, that had come directly from Gloria herself. Meanwhile, word of the confrontation spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some residents were outraged by the audacity of the HOA's actions, while others sided with Gloria, believing she was only trying to keep everyone safe. Tension simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. For Jack, the experience was surreal. Here he was, a decorated war hero who had faced enemy fire on foreign soil, being harassed by amateurs playing dress-up in his own backyard. It was almost laughable, if it weren't so infuriating. But instead of letting anger consume him, Jack channeled his energy into action. He reached out to local news outlets, sharing his story in hopes of raising awareness about the dangers of vigilante justice. He emphasized the importance of due process and respecting individual rights, regardless of personal opinions. Despite the absurdity of the situation, Jack couldn't help but admire the irony. Two wannabe cops had tried to strong-arm a man who commanded some of the most elite soldiers in the world. They had underestimated him, assuming he would fold under pressure. But Jack Reed didn't fold easily, not in combat, not in life. And as he stood on his porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about defending himself anymore. It was about standing up for principles worth fighting for freedom, fairness, and the rule of law. And so, as night fell over the quiet suburban streets, Jack prepared for the next chapter of this bizarre saga. Whatever came next, he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. As the investigation into the fake cops unfolded, the truth began to trickle out like water through cracks in a dam. The local police department took the matter seriously, not just because impersonating law enforcement was a felony, but also because it exposed deeper issues within the neighborhood. Officers combed through evidence, including Jack's surveillance footage and statements from witnesses, piecing together a clearer picture of what had happened. What they discovered painted Gloria Thompson and her HOA board as the masterminds behind the entire fiasco. When confronted by detectives, Gloria initially tried to play innocent. She claimed she had only been concerned for the safety of the community and insisted that hiring the fake officers was meant to resolve the situation peacefully. But her story quickly unraveled under scrutiny. Her attempts to justify her actions sounded hollow, especially when investigators pointed out that she hadn't followed proper legal channels or even consulted with actual authorities before taking matters into her own hands. Instead, she had acted impulsively, driven more by personal vendettas than genuine concern. The two off-duty security guards, meanwhile, were far less evasive during questioning. Once promised immunity in exchange for cooperation, they spilled everything: how Gloria had approached them, how she'd convinced them to pose as police officers and how she'd provided them with makeshift uniforms and badges. They admitted they knew their actions were questionable, but figured they wouldn't face consequences since they were helping the HOA. Their naivete and willingness to participate in such a reckless scheme left many shaking their heads in disbelief. News of the scandal spread like wildfire. Local media outlets picked up the story almost immediately, turning Jack's quiet suburban drama into a national talking point. Headlines blared phrases like, HOA president hires, fake cops to confront veteran, and social media exploded with memes mocking Gloria's overreach. One viral post featured a cartoon of Gloria dressed as a sheriff, wielding a megaphone while two bumbling henchmen cowered behind her. The caption read, "When your HOA meeting turns into a cop show." For Jack, the sudden attention was overwhelming, but not entirely unwelcome. He saw an opportunity to turn this bizarre incident into something meaningful. Rather than retreat from the spotlight, he leaned into it, using interviews and public appearances to educate people about responsible gun ownership and the importance of respecting constitutional rights. In every conversation, he remained calm, composed and respectful, never stooping to insults or accusations. His professionalism earned him widespread admiration, even from those who might not agree with his views on firearms. But not everyone was supportive. Some neighbors sided with Gloria, believing her intentions, however misguided, were noble. What if someone got hurt? They argued. Isn't it better to be safe than sorry? Others accused Jack of being too confrontational, suggesting he should have simply complied with the fake officer's demands instead of resisting. These criticisms stung, but Jack refused to let them derail him. He understood that change rarely came without pushback, and he was determined to stay focused on the bigger picture. Amidst the chaos, the HOA board found itself in disarray. Several members resigned in protest, unwilling to associate themselves with Gloria's antics any longer. Those who stayed faced mounting pressure from residents demanding accountability and transparency. Meetings that were once orderly and predictable devolved into shouting matches, with tempers flaring and alliances fracturing. It became clear that Gloria's leadership style, which relied heavily on intimidation and control, was unsustainable. Within weeks, she stepped down as president, citing personal reasons. Though no one believed her excuse, most were just relieved to see her go. Gloria's departure didn't mean the controversy ended, however. Many residents continued to grapple with lingering questions about trust, authority, and the role of the HOA in their lives. For years, the organization had operated like a shadow government, enforcing rules arbitrarily and punishing dissenters mercilessly. Now its credibility lay in tatters, leaving the community divided between those who wanted stricter regulations and those who championed individual freedoms. Jack seized this moment of uncertainty as an opportunity to foster dialogue. He reached out to local organizations, proposing workshops aimed at bridging the gap between opposing viewpoints. The first event, titled Understanding Firearms, Safety, Rights, and Responsibilities, drew a surprisingly large crowd. Attendees included veterans, law enforcement officials, concerned parents, and even a few former critics of Jack's. Together, they discussed topics ranging from gun storage best practices to the legal framework surrounding Second Amendment rights. The highlight of the workshop came when Jack invited a local sheriff to speak. The sheriff, a burly man with a warm smile, shared stories from his career, emphasizing the importance of collaboration between citizens and law enforcement. "We're all on the same team here," he said, addressing the audience. "Our goal is to keep our communities safe, not to divide them." By the end of the session, tensions seemed to ease slightly. Neighbors who had once eyed each other warily now chatted amicably over coffee and cookies. While disagreements still existed, there was a newfound sense of mutual respect, a recognition that differing opinions didn't have to lead to hostility. Behind the scenes, Jack worked tirelessly to ensure these conversations continued. He partnered with schools, churches, and community centers to host additional events, each one designed to promote understanding and unity. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood began to heal. People started looking beyond stereotypes and assumptions, realizing that their shared humanity outweighed their differences. Even some of Jack's former detractors softened their stance. One neighbor, a woman named Linda who had previously criticized him online, knocked on his door one evening with a plate of homemade brownies. "I owe you an apology," she said sheepishly. "I judged you unfairly, and I'm sorry. You've done so much for this community, and I want you to know I appreciate it." Jack accepted the gesture graciously, thanking her for her honesty. Moments like these reminded him why he had chosen to stay in the neighborhood despite the challenges. Beneath all the noise and conflict, there was goodness here. Good people trying their best to navigate a complicated world. As the weeks turned into months, life in the suburb gradually returned to normal. The HOA implemented new policies prioritizing transparency and inclusivity over rigid enforcement. Residents attended meetings with renewed enthusiasm, eager to rebuild trust and strengthen their bonds. And though whispers of the scandal occasionally surfaced, they carried less weight now, relics of a chapter everyone hoped to leave behind. For Jack, the experience reinforced lessons he had learned long ago. That leadership wasn't about wielding power, but about inspiring others to do better. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. And that sometimes standing your ground could spark positive change far beyond what you imagined. As he sat on his porch one evening, watching Ethan toss a football in the yard, Jack felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but he knew he had made a difference, not just for himself, but for his family, his neighbors, and the community at large. And that, he realized, was worth fighting for. The aftermath of the HOA scandal brought a mix of emotions for everyone involved. For Jack, it was a time of reflection and growth, but also a chance to address deeper issues that had been simmering beneath the surface long before Gloria Thompson's ill-fated attempt to seize his shotguns. The neighborhood, once divided by fear and misunderstanding, now faced an opportunity to heal. But healing doesn't happen overnight. It takes effort, patience, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. As the dust settled, Jack found himself thinking about the bigger picture. Yes, he had defended his rights, exposed corruption within the HOA, and earned widespread respect in the process. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about him. This was about something much larger. The challenges veterans often face when returning to civilian life, the misconceptions surrounding responsible gun ownership, and the delicate balance between individual freedoms and community safety. These were complex topics, ones that couldn't be solved with a single workshop or conversation. They required sustained action and education, determined to make a lasting impact. Jack decided to expand his efforts beyond the initial firearm safety workshops. He partnered with local organizations to create a series of programs aimed at fostering understanding between different groups: veterans, law enforcement, educators, parents, and even skeptics who might not see eye to eye with him. Each program was carefully designed to encourage open dialogue, dispel myths, and build bridges where walls had once stood. One of the most impactful initiatives was called Bridging the Gap. Held monthly in the community center, these sessions brought together diverse voices to discuss pressing issues affecting the neighborhood. Topics ranged from crime prevention and mental health awareness to conflict resolution and civic engagement. What made these discussions unique was their focus on storytelling. Participants were encouraged to share personal experiences, whether it was a veteran talking about reintegration struggles, a teacher discussing the challenges of addressing gun violence in schools, or a parent expressing concerns about raising kids in today's world. By humanizing the issues, Jack hoped to break down barriers and foster empathy. At one such session, a young mother named Sarah shared her story. She described how her son had recently come home from school upset after hearing classmates talk about guns. "I didn't know what to say," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I wanted to protect him, but I also didn't want to scare him more. So I told him we'd figure it out together." Jack listened intently, nodding as she spoke. When it was his turn to respond, he offered words of reassurance. "You're doing exactly the right thing," he said gently. "Talking openly and honestly is the first step. Kids are curious and they'll hear things no matter how hard we try to shield them. But if we approach the topic with care and context, we can help them understand without feeding into fear. Sarah smiled, visibly relieved. Later, she approached Jack privately to thank him. "I never thought I'd say this," she confessed, "but hearing your perspective has changed the way I think about all of this. You're not what I expected. Not at all." Her comment stayed with Jack long after the meeting ended. It reminded him that change often starts small, with moments of connection and understanding. And while he couldn't change everyone's mind, every positive interaction mattered. Meanwhile, the fallout from the scandal continued to ripple through the neighborhood. Gloria Thompson, though no longer president of the HOA, remained a polarizing figure. Some still defended her actions, believing she had acted out of concern for the community. Others viewed her as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when unchecked power meets misplaced ambition. Either way, her reputation was irreparably tarnished, and she eventually moved out of the neighborhood altogether, unable to bear the constant whispers and stares. In her absence, the HOA underwent significant reforms. New leadership emerged, committed to transparency, inclusivity, and collaboration. Monthly meetings became less about enforcing arbitrary rules and more about addressing real concerns voiced by residents. A committee was formed to review existing policies, ensuring they aligned with both legal standards and community values. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild, a testament to the resilience of the people who called this place home. For Jack, however, the journey wasn't without its challenges. Despite the progress, there were still moments of tension. During a town hall meeting, a heated debate erupted over proposed changes to the HOA's firearm policy. One resident argued passionately for stricter regulations, citing national statistics about gun violence. Another countered that such measures would infringe on constitutional rights and punish law-abiding citizens unfairly. Voices rose, tempers flared, and for a moment it seemed like old divisions might resurface. But then Jack stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "Let's take a step back," he said calmly, raising his hands to quiet the room. "We're all here because we care about this community. That's something we have in common. Let's focus on finding solutions that work for everyone, not just some of us." His words struck a chord. The arguing subsided, replaced by nods of agreement. Though the debate continued, it did so respectfully, with participants genuinely listening to each other's perspectives. By the end of the meeting, a compromise had been reached, one that balanced safety with freedom, regulation with responsibility. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Looking back, Jack realized how far they'd come. Just months earlier, the same group of neighbors had been locked in bitter conflict, distrustful and divided. Now they were working together, imperfectly but persistently, to create a better future. It was proof that even in the face of adversity, people could rise above their differences if given the chance. And yet Jack knew the work wasn't finished. Building a strong, united community was an ongoing process, one that required vigilance and commitment. He vowed to remain actively involved, using his experience and influence to guide others toward meaningful solutions. Whether it was mentoring young veterans struggling to adjust to civilian life, advocating for sensible gun laws, or simply lending a listening ear to a neighbor in need, Jack saw countless ways to make a difference. On a personal level, the ordeal had deepened his bond with Ethan. Watching his father handle the situation with grace and integrity inspired the teenager to take pride in their family's values. Together, they spent weekends volunteering at local shelters, participating in charity runs, and organizing events to bring neighbors together. Their relationship grew stronger with each passing day, rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. As summer gave way to fall, the neighborhood transformed. Leaves turned vibrant, shades of red and gold, casting a warm glow over streets that had once felt tense and unwelcoming. Neighbors greeted each other with genuine smiles, exchanging pleasantries and invitations to holiday gatherings. Children played freely in parks, their laughter echoing through the crisp autumn air. It was a scene straight out of a postcard, a testament to the power of perseverance and unity. For Jack, it was a reminder of why he loved this place. Despite its flaws, and there were many, it was home. It was where he raised his son, where he found solace after years of service, and where he discovered the strength of a community coming together. And as he stood on his porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But in the midst of imperfection, there was beauty. In the connections forged, the lessons learned, and the hope that tomorrow could always be better than today. As the months rolled by, the neighborhood began to feel like a different place. The scars of the HOA scandal hadn't disappeared entirely. How could they? But they had faded, softened by time and effort. What remained was a community that had weathered a storm together and emerged stronger for it. For Jack Reed, this transformation wasn't just something he observed, it was something he helped create. And while he never sought recognition or praise, his quiet leadership left an indelible mark on everyone around him. The HOA, once a source of frustration and division, became a model of transparency and cooperation under its new leadership. Monthly meetings were no longer dreaded events where rules were imposed without discussion. Instead, they turned into collaborative gatherings where residents voiced their concerns, debated ideas, and worked toward solutions that benefited everyone. Policies were rewritten with input from all sides, ensuring they reflected the needs and values of the entire community. Even those who had initially opposed Jack's stance on firearms came to appreciate the importance of respectful dialogue and compromise. One of the most significant changes was the introduction of a community ambassador program. Modeled after Jack's workshops, the initiative encouraged neighbors to take an active role in fostering understanding and trust. Volunteers served as liaisons between different groups: veterans, parents, teachers, business owners, facilitating conversations and addressing conflicts before they escalated. It wasn't always easy, but the results spoke for themselves. Fewer misunderstandings, more collaboration, and a shared sense of purpose. Jack played a key role in shaping the program, offering guidance based on his own experiences. He often reminded participants that progress wasn't about eliminating differences. It was about embracing them. "We don't have to agree on everything," he would say during training sessions, "but we do have to respect each other. That's what makes a community strong." His words resonated deeply, especially among younger volunteers who looked up to him as a mentor. Ethan, now thriving in high school, joined the program alongside his father, eager to learn from Jack's example. Together, they organized events that brought people together: movie nights in the park, charity drives for local shelters, even a community garden where neighbors could grow vegetables and flowers side by side. Each project reinforced the idea that small actions could lead to big changes. Despite the positive momentum, there were still moments of tension. Not everyone was ready to let go of old grievances, and some continued to harbor resentment toward Jack, or at least the principles he represented. During a spring cleanup event, one former critic confronted him, accusing him of forcing his agenda on the neighborhood. Jack listened patiently, letting the man vent his frustrations. When the tirade ended, he simply nodded and said, "I hear you, and I respect your perspective. If you ever want to talk more, my door is open." To everyone's surprise, the man accepted the invitation. A few weeks later, he showed up at Jack's house with a six-pack of soda and a willingness to listen. Their conversation lasted hours, covering everything from politics to parenting. By the end, neither had changed their core beliefs, but both walked away with a deeper understanding of the other's point of view. It was a small victory, but one that underscored the power of patience and empathy. As summer approached, the neighborhood buzzed with excitement over the annual block party, a tradition that had fallen by the wayside during the darker days of the HOA scandal. This year, however, it promised to be bigger and better than ever. Residents pooled resources to organize games, food stalls, and live music. Kids painted murals on plywood panels, turning them into colorful backdrops for photo booths. Adults decorated tables with handmade centerpieces, adding a personal touch to every detail. On the day of the party, the streets overflowed with laughter and cheer. Families mingled freely, sharing stories and swapping recipes. Old friends reconnected while new friendships blossomed. At the center of it all stood Jack, flipping burgers on a massive grill and chatting with anyone who stopped by. His presence seemed to anchor the celebration, reminding everyone of how far they'd come since those tense days when fear and suspicion ruled the neighborhood. During a lull in the festivities, Gloria Thompson made a brief appearance. She had returned to the area after selling her home, settling into a small apartment on the outskirts of town. Her arrival caused a stir, with whispers rippling through the crowd. But instead of avoiding her, Jack greeted her warmly, inviting her to join the celebration. "This is your community too," he said, handing her a plate of food. "No hard feelings, okay?" Gloria hesitated, clearly unsure of how she'd be received. But as she looked around at the smiling faces and lively atmosphere, something shifted in her expression. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to relax, if only for a moment. Though she didn't stay long, her brief visit symbolized closure, not just for her, but for everyone who had been touched by the scandal. When the sun set and the party wound down, Jack found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. From the fake cops knocking on his door to the unity displayed at the block party, it had been a roller coaster of emotions and lessons. He thought about the challenges he'd faced, the threats to his rights, the attacks on his character, the pressure to fight back, and realized that none of it compared to the joy of seeing his community heal. For Ethan, the experience had been transformative. Growing up in the shadow of the scandal, he had witnessed firsthand the complexities of leadership, courage, and forgiveness. Watching his father navigate adversity with grace and determination inspired him to pursue his own path with integrity. Whether it was standing up for a classmate being bullied or volunteering at a local animal shelter, Ethan carried the values Jack had instilled in him into every aspect of his life. As for Jack, he knew his work wasn't done. There would always be new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference, but he also knew he didn't have to face them alone. The bonds he had forged with his neighbors, the trust he had earned through consistent action, and the resilience of the community itself gave him hope for the future. In the quiet hours after the party, as he sat on his porch sipping coffee, Jack felt a profound sense of peace. The stars twinkled above, casting a gentle light over the neighborhood he called home. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the faint hum of crickets filled the air. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was good. And in that moment, surrounded by the people and place he loved, Jack Reed knew he had found exactly what he'd been searching for all along: a sense of belonging, a legacy worth leaving behind, and a reminder that even in the toughest times, hope could shine through.